And I'm going to mute you guys if you don't mind. And then that way, because I know you guys are probably having dinner and stuff. So I'm going to mute you. But that doesn't mean you can't unmute yourself.
To study for tomorrow.
Oh, you're set. Okay. Do you have any questions about what we're doing for tomorrow or what you're doing today? It's okay if you don't have any questions. Don't worry. All right, jump in when you have questions, but I'm going to mute everybody. We're gonna talk about encroachments. All right. Here we go. Just kidding. All right. I'm glad you guys are here. For those of you that are watching on the recording, we are going to be in the property ownership PowerPoint that I have on the Google Drive for prepping for the state exam. For those of you that are like, but I'm not prepping for the state exam, I'm doing my prerequisite training right now, or my prerequisite education right now, or I'm thinking about going into real estate. All of this stuff works together because it's all fundamental and it's all the information that you need to not only learn, but it's the information that you need to retain. So for those of you that have gone through class with me before, you haven't necessarily seen these slides because these slides are brand spanking new within the last few weeks. If you're just new with me, these aren't even the slides that I'm using in the classes in the school. So if you're starting school with me next week, obviously you haven't seen anything. So there's that too. But anyways, be blessed, be encouraged. If you feel overwhelmed and stressed, let's do this. Let's take 1 minute right now to breathe. So we are going to put the timer on for 1 minute. Hold on, let me put the timer on. And the timer starts now, and we're just going to breathe. So I want you to breathe in 1, 2, 3. I'd like you to breathe out 1, 2, 3. Breathe in. Breathe out. 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 Breathe in. And breathe out. Okay, that is our minute. So I hope that helped recenter you if you're a little bit concerned or a little bit flustered. Nothing that we are going to talk about tonight is going to need to be completely 1000% retained today. So we're going to continue to move forward with our Google Drive for prerequisite training as well as for prepping for the state exam. This happens to be one of the slideshows for the state exam. It's still going to help those of you that have yet to talk about encroachments in class, and it'll help those of you that have already talked about encroachments in class. All right. So encroachments. The word encroachment sounds like someone is in the process of stepping over a line from their side on to yours. And when people's trees grow up, so if your neighbor's trees grow up and over the fence onto your side, that tree is encroaching on your property. When your neighbor's tree, the root system grows under the fence and then through the wall of your in-ground pool, it's damage. We know that's a different word, right? But that is considered encroachment. And there are rules and regulations with regards to how close trees are planted to property lines. And it's really important for us to remember that we may want to beautify our space and we may want to have a shaded area, but we need to remember that our neighbors might not want the root system to break their foundation or go into their pool or the like. So one of the things we can do as to be amazing neighbors is to make sure that we ask about the root system of the trees that we are buying. You can buy a black walnut tree. So as high as it goes straight up into the sky is as high or as low as the root system goes down into the ground. And there's a number of trees out there that are called widow makers for a reason. They have a root system that comes up and it pulls up out of the soil when that tree isn't watered. and it can fall without making an initial noise that something's cracking. They're called widowmakers because they kill quickly, if you will, or they hurt quickly, and then people progressively don't come out of it. So when I think of encroachments, I always think about trees. I don't necessarily think about the opportunity that our neighbor would do something like build a shed partially onto our property, but those kind of things have happened as well. And that's encroaching on your neighbor's property. So an encroachment is an unauthorized placement of permanent improvements that intrude on adjacent property owned by another. So you're like, wait a minute, how is a tree an unauthorized placement of a permanent improvement? Well, we've talked in class, for those of you that have had classes with me where we've talked about fructus naturalis and fructus industrialis. We've talked about how fructus naturalis are the trees, the natural growing trees that are indigenous to the area, right? That grow, and they're just always, they've been there. There's also the trees that we plant, and then those as well are what we call hardwired into the property, just like a fixture is hardwired into a home, a chandelier, if you will, a fan. Not a fan like a box fan that you put in the window, but a fan that has lights on it that goes into the ceiling, hardwired in. So an encroachment is an unauthorized placement. That where the tree was placed initially isn't unauthorized. It's on your land, you're allowed to do that. But the problem is the tree's, if you will, root system did not stay on that side of the property. And because that tree's permanent, that permanent improvement has taken authority of somebody else's property, and it's encroaching, it's taking over without permission. Okay, so for those of you that are football fans, there's a football fan example here. All those times when a defensive team goes over the neutral line before the ball is snapped. If you don't play football, I'll tell you how I know football. The dudes with the orange helmet, one of these guys moves over this line before it's time to go, and there's a whistle blown, and there's like these flags that go up in the sky, and then these guys are upset because these guys went before they were supposed to go at the same time, or vice versa. So what does that mean? Well, they did something without permission of the other side. They went over that neutral line before it was their turn to do it. Now, is that the same thing as an encroachment? No, but that is really what happens with encroachments. If you guys can think of a better example, let me know. An encroachment is when a structure or improvement on one's personal land physically intrudes on the land of another. Again, I think of trees, but this could include a fence or a driveway which crosses the property line. I remember being at the building department. Sorry, I started saying that and then I took a sip. I remember being at the building department building, if you will, and I remember the person in front of me wanting to talking to them about how they'd like to buy this home, and the improvements that were done on the property happened to pour cement across their property onto the neighboring property, and the people that were selling the house did have the city come out and check it, and then did get approval and so on and so forth. The problem with the situation is whoever okayed what they were doing with the city did not realize that the cement had been poured over onto the other person's property by 2 inches all the way up the property line. And so the buyers, the interested party in buying the property, said, but you guys approved that. And then the city came around, or the building and safety code, if you will, came around a person and red tagged the property because they had illegally poured cement on the neighbor's property. And so these people were going in circles in front of me. And so basically they were like, what can we do? And the guy said, well, I wouldn't buy the house until this is resolved. And I was like, oh man, you might want to say, why don't you go talk to an attorney? Because giving that kind of legal advice is a massive no-no in the state of California, but I'm the only one that heard it. So other than the people that were there. But anyway, there was just a lot of heated frustration. I just had a basic question and I was gone in 2 minutes after the 10-minute conversation heated conversation that they were having. So anyway, encroachments can be fences, they can be driveways, they can be even like a shed that's partially on your property, built on your property. Now sheds don't necessarily have to have permits. You can go buy a shed and have it delivered by Home Depot, and you even have Home Depot build it and put it where you ask them to put it. Home Depot's not going to be like, is this your property line? They're putting it where you ask them to put it because it can be moved. It's mobile per se. Encroachment is a form of trespass. Ergo, the image, not the football one, but the gentleman, these two penciled in characters, it's considered trespassing. So when an encroachment occurs, you may be able to sue your neighbor for trespassing. So how many people here have a neighbor that has done something, and it's not always purposeful, have planted a tree or planted shrubs, and they've gone under your fence and they've kind of jacked up the fence, and they've kind of jacked up your sidewalk between your house and the fence? That is actually your neighbor's, it is your neighbor's requirement. They are required to fix that. It's the root system of their tree or their bush. But how much money is it going to cost for you to take them to court to sue them and win? And then what have you won? You've won a judgment, and that is all. So you've got $15,000 worth of damage to the side of your house. It took $25,000. It won't take that much. Let's say $2,500 to sue them. And when it's all said and done, you sue them, you win, and they don't have $15,000 to fix it. So you didn't make you're out $2,500, where you might have been able to do your own weekender version with a couple YouTube videos and an arborist to make sure that you're not killing the plant. Or you could have just said to the judge, Your Honor, I don't think that they're going to pay me the $15K. Can I just hold on just a second? Baba Ganoush, who could that be? Did you want to say hi to everyone? Say hello. Say hello. What is it? Who could it be? I think somebody's outside in a car. And I just heard the alarm on the car. They honked the horn. Okay. We're working here. Baba, you want to say hello? Say hello. No, say hello. Okay. We love you. We'll see you in a minute. Okay. Go play with your stuff. I know. Here's your blanket. Here's one of your blankets. Here's one of your toys. And here's a ball and a different. Oh, did you want to come back up? She's gonna watch with us. She's gonna help with the PowerPoints. Okay, come on. You can help with the PowerPoints. All right. So we were talking about your $2,500 out. You might want to, at that point, say to the judge, I know that they can't afford, or they can't afford the $15,000. Can you rule in my favor that I can just dig up the roots and do something so that the root system doesn't come back through the fence, so that your side of things is resolved? There are ways of talking to the court with regards to that. And sometimes it just goes to arbitration. You can have mediation or something, but these aren't easy fixes. There's never an easy fix when there's damage being done to your property by your neighbor when it comes to encroachments. So sometimes it's better to just try to negotiate it with them, or go down to the building department and ask them how to handle the situation, but they might not know where the property line is, and it could be worse. So anyways, I digress. I'm giving you more information than you need to know. It's good that you're aware of what an encroachment is, but the book is very clinical, or the studying material is very clinical with regards to this is what an encroachment is and this is how you resolve it. Well, everything has due process. So if you're going to sue someone, you got to get on the calendar, and then you've got to take time off from work. And so there's a saying that Californians love to sue. The reality of the situation is, I don't think we actually sue as much as people say we sue. It's just that we always say we're going to sue. And maybe Californians just love mediation. Maybe that's the way the statement should be. All right, enough about encroachments, except we're on the next slide. An encroachment can be considered non-financial. So it could be a non-financial encumbrance. So a non-financial encumbrance is one that affects the use of the property. So when we talk about non-financial encumbrances, the reason why it affects the use of the property as an example, that easement is causing you not to be able to use that part of your property. You might have wanted to put your barbecue there, or your child's stroller might not be able to roll over that. So let's see what the book says. The non-financial encumbrance is one that affects the use of a property, such as easement, a building restriction, an encroachment, or a lease. So a non-financial encumbrance could be any of these things, and it just so happens that an encroachment is part of that. And not another type of non-financial encumbrance being a building restriction means that if it's usually with commercial properties, and a building restriction would be that you can have a beauty salon in said building, but you can't necessarily have a bar. And so there are building restrictions. There are zoning restrictions. It's not that there can't be a bar in that neighborhood. It just can't be in that building for whatever reason. When it says that a non-financial encumbrance is a lease, there's an association with how the lease is written with regards to what you are and you are not allowed to do on that property. All right. That was encumbrances. That was quick-ish. Let's talk about emblements. So emblements are actually the part of the agricultural industry that is sold. The emblements, and when I think of emblements, or I want you to think of emblements, you don't have to, for those of you that do not celebrate Christmas or celebrate decorating in any way. When I think of the word emblement, I think about decor, or I think about hanging ornaments on a Christmas tree, or hanging ornaments on building wreaths, front door wreath that says welcome. I, being a teacher, we used to have welcome wreaths that are in our class and do seasonal stuff for the younger grades when I taught younger grades. But I think the word implement, I think of ornament or ornamental. And so growing crops that are cultivated annually for sale, that's emblements. So it's the harvest from the agricultural job or work that your company is doing. If you have one of those, emblements are considered personal property. All of that work was done all year with the, well, we have a wheat field here. The moment that wheat field is cut down, the wheat is processed, and then it is it has a casing around the outside of it, right? And that process has to, there's a massive amount of process that has to go through in order for it to get to look like the wheat or wheat flour that we see, or wheat pasta that we see at the grocery store. So this whole entire process of getting the implement to the point where it needs to be, that takes a while. It takes a season. There's seed time and harvest, right? So implements take time. They are personal property because they are never meant to stay on the land. They are meant to be sold. And we always, cross your fingers, your eyes, your toes, and light a candle that they can be sold for more than it costs to get them to the point where they are right now for sale. So these are considered personal property. Another way you can look at it is emblements, or this isn't an implement, but let's say it is cocoa butter. So if I was at a cocoa tree, I don't think I'd have been at a cocoa tree and be able to get this, of course not. But if you can put it in your pocket. An implement can be put in your pocket. Not that I'm asking you to take things away, but I want you to look at the field where it came from is the place where the agriculture was grown and the implements were harvested, and some of them can be put in your pocket, right? And they can be sold, taken to the grocery store, taken to the processing plant to turn that wheat into bread or pasta or whatever it was going to be turned into. Whereas the squash that we see on here and the pumpkin, same exact thing. They're taken to the grocery store and they can be for decor, right? Implements, decor, decorating. They can be done that for the harvest season, for the Halloween of it all, for Thanksgiving, if you will. So that kind of a decor thing. In that same respect, I've seen wheat wreaths. So there was a reason why I used these images to remember implements are personal property. And when I think of the word implement, I think of ornament, I think of decor, I think of decorating. And so I picked things where it would be kind of like the holiday decorating kind of time. So when it comes to implements, these are annual crops. So let's look at the term definition, right? Which have been legally cultivated and belong to the tenant. And you're like, wait a minute, I thought the farmer was doing this. Well, a lot of times you'll find that a farmer doesn't necessarily own the land they're farming. And they're considered, though, if they don't own that property, they're considered the tenant. So they are farming that land. They are going on that property day and night, any time of the day or night, they're making sure that that land is taken care of. So here are some of the key takeaways. They have that implied right to the harvest. They also, you could look at it from the perspective that they have almost like a passport or a pass to go onto that property that's not there. They have a license, if you will, to go on and off the property. So the tenant has an implied right to its harvest because the tenant, the farmer, sorry, I've got the hiccup burps. The farmer has done the work for either a season or a year, and now that it's not just a right, but it's implied. They've been doing all the work up to this point for them to get the harvest. They did all the work. So implements are treated as the tenant's property. And I don't know that we actually talked about that ever in one of the previous classes, that implements are technically the tenant's property. We know they're personal property, but we need to think of them as the ownership is in the hands of the farmer or the tenant, depending upon how you want to look at that, not necessarily the owner of the property. If the farmer doesn't own the property and he's only tending to the land or the tenant of the property, then we need to think of it as they are in ownership of all that, of the harvest of all the work they had done all season or all year. We know they're considered personal property, but repetition equals retention, right? A tenant farmer has the right to his crops even after his lease ends. And you might find that there's a question on the state exam, a storyline where it's saying a tenant farmer leased a property for 5 years, and at the end of the 5th year, the harvest had not been, or the crop had yet to be harvested. Which of the following owns the harvest? And the answer is that it's the tenant farmer. And it doesn't matter that the lease ended because all of the work up to that point had been paid for. So for those of you that are like, what's a tenant farmer? A tenant farmer is obviously someone that is renting the land, right? But they're also in that price of renting that land, and there's the cost of the water, and there's all of the work and blood, sweat, and tears, if you will, that have come before they harvest the land. So they've done all the work, and yet they have not gotten paid for all of the work that they've done. So even if their lease ends before the harvest comes, they do have the right to the harvest. It is their property. Crops grown on property just before it's sold are also generally considered the personal property of the seller. Very true. So let's look at it this way. Let's say that the farmer was not a tenant. He was not leasing the property. Let's say the farmer decided to sell his property in the contract. So for those of you that are like, Kathy, I'm never going to deal with agricultural property. I hear you. I never thought I'd be dealing with agricultural property. I never thought that I would be on the realtor side of things. I always thought I'd be on the lending side of things. But the reality of the situation is we can look at like at the implements or the crop in the same way we can look at an investment property that has a renter in it. In the same way, so what we're saying right here, where it says crops grown on a property just before it's sold, or also generally considered the personal property of the seller. In that same way, if a tenant is living in one of your investment or one of your client's investment properties, and you go, they're like, hey, we want to sell it. And that tenant has a lease agreement for another 6 months. When that property sells, that 6-month lease is still with that property, but we have to disclose that information to whomever would like to buy the property. There are people that are in a lease that the lease is not going to break. And if we break the lease, it's going to cost money. So in that same way, crops grown on a property just before it's sold are also, and it says generally, considered the personal property of the seller. And what they're saying there is, let's say the farmer was like, hey, I did all this work. I'm selling you the property, but this year's harvest is mine. Okay, cool. This happened to my parents. My parents bought a piece of property in the Central Valley that had some grapes on it. And the people that sold the property to him negated to share that they had leased the grapes behind the home to a family member. And so after the deal closed, the the person that they had leased it to, the farmer that had leased it to, knocked on my dad's door and was like, "Hey, can we talk?" And my dad's like, "Sure, what do you know, what's up?" And the gentleman said, "I just need to let you know that I've been leasing the property behind your house." And my dad's like, "That's cool." And he's like, well, I just want you to know you can't have the grapes on the vine. And my dad's like, "Okay, that's totally fine. Let me know how you want to work this." Because my dad then turned around and said to the guy, "Obviously the real estate agent didn't disclose the information. That's not a problem. I don't have the equipment to work on that. So how long is the lease?" And that'll help me know that I don't have to worry about going and getting a tractor and some other things. My dad was totally down for getting a tractor. We had tractors when I was a kid. But the reality of the situation is, we as agents, if that was our client, if my dad was our client, we would be in trouble. We should have disclosed that the property behind the house was being leased to a farmer. And not only that, the other agent knew the information. And we found out later that the other agent knew. It's like, "Oh, well, I just didn't think it was that big of a deal." We as agents can lose our licenses for less. So we've got to be really careful. If we see whether it's an agricultural piece of property that has a field that has to be harvested, that's full of implements, or it's an investment property that has a tenant living in it that has a lease agreement that is not up. In both scenarios, we as agents need to identify those as concerns for the new owner of the property, so that they're aware of, if it is a tenant that has a lease, they aren't going to be able to move into that property without some process of removing the tenant by paying for them to move or something. There's money involved in that. It's going to be a financial obligation. In that same way, we're talking about crops. Whoever's buying the property, if they think they can just go out and start selling the grapes off the vine, they're going to find themselves in a predicament. So we need to clarify that in the disclosures, that the most recent harvest, or the harvest that's coming in 3 months or in 2 months, goes to the owner of the home, the farmer, if you will. And so in these kind of situations, I think if we parallel an agricultural property with an investment property, because both of them, the owner of said property is making money, right? So if we look at it from that perspective, then it makes sense why you guys are not only just learning about talking about crops being grown on a property, and investment properties where somebody has a multi-unit, up to four if it's residential, and then over four, 5+ if it's a commercial situation for residences. So these kind of things are good to talk about and discuss. I want you to remember that personal property goes with the person. And I'll bring up, and what's this, Palmer's cocoa butter formula. This is not sponsoring the show, but if you guys want to sponsor, it's okay, because this stuff smells fabulous. I'm just kidding. Okay, that and show, class, whatever you want to call it. So this is personal property. This can go in my pocket. A lease agreement can go in my pocket. A mortgage can go in my pocket. An encroachment can't go in my pocket. The root system breaking under the foundation of my house or into the pool, right? That can't go in my pocket. That's not personal property. So remember that personal property goes with the person. So let's talk about an example. This comes into play in the law of landlord and tenant. In the foreclosure of a mortgage and other legal situations that place the rights of another party in conflict with those of a farmer who has planted the crops. So in these kind of situations, we need to talk about doctrine of implements. And you're like, wait a minute, what does that mean? That's okay. We're going to talk about the term and definition here. The doctrine of implements operates to guarantee the farmer's right to the harvest because of the labor that has been involved prior. So in that same situation, we could say a tenant is living in a property that's owned by somebody else, and they are losing the property to foreclosure. The lending institution that let the landlord borrow the money against that property knows that the landlord may not actually know that the landlord doesn't live there, but the tenant can have that piece of personal property. This isn't this is personal property, but this isn't that. Let's say that this is the lease agreement that the tenant had on the property, and they can forward that to the bank, and the bank will go, okay, I see that you're supposed to be able to live here for another 6 or 7 months. We technically are going to foreclose on the house. We can have you live here 3, and we'll help you with moving expenses, because the lending institution will just add the cost of moving the tenant out of the property to the cost of the foreclosure, and it's so that they stay within the letter of the law. Can you imagine a bank kicking tenants out of a property and the tenants understanding what their rights are, and then going to HUD and saying, hey, I have proof here, I have documented evidence that they knew that we had a lease and all of the things. Nobody wants to get in trouble with HUD. Nobody wants to get in trouble with a governing agency. Well, maybe not, some people do. Again, you guys, this is like week 3 of me not necessarily having an inside voice. So I do hope she comes back, but she might not, because on my birthday, maybe I'm just like, I'm at an age where I just don't care anymore. I don't know. But the point I'm trying to make here is this. Lending institutions want to continue to lend money so that they can continue to make compound interest, or interest on top of interest. And they're going to try to keep their nose clean with regards to the federal government as well as the state government. Lending institutions are governed by the federal government because most of them can lend in every state, or in most states. So that being said, I might have gone too far with the doctrine of emblements, but the bottom line is this: the doctrine of emblements proves that the farmer isn't the only one that has the rights to the emblements. It also proves the tenant has the right to be in the property if it's being foreclosed on for the lease, or the lender might have to cough up some cashola. And we'll talk about, and I've had more than one student tell me, oh, well, I have some friends that were in a lease and the bank told them just to get out, and they got out. Well, they need to contact the local, they need to contact HUD and some other places, so that some other, whoever it is in their neck of the woods, if you will, but it's usually HUD, and let them know what happened. So HUD's aware that companies like, I can't name any companies because I don't want to get in trouble for naming any companies, but Mutual of Omaha, I think they're an insurance company. Let's say that it's Mutual of Omaha Mortgage Institution, and they've done somebody dirty. Well, it's good for HUD to know that Mutual of Omaha is not doing what their due diligence, they're not doing right. They're not doing their due diligence or their fiduciary duty, which is to cause no harm, which is to be honest about everything about the property. And honesty in that situation is the lender saying, you legally have the right to be here. That's the accuracy of the property. All right. So doctrine of emblements example. Let's see what the example is. If the tenant dies before the harvest, the right to harvest the crops will pass to his, her, or their heirs, even if the heirs have not been physically occupying the land. That makes sense, right? So all the work that our father did, if our father was a farmer, does go to us. We will have to figure out how to harvest the farm. But I would venture to say that there were probably people working with my dad if my dad was the farmer. So the reasoning behind the doctrine is to compensate the tenant for their labor. So the key to doctrine of emblements is getting paid for the work that was done. And you're like, but how does that work with a lease? Well, a lease is, I promise to stay here and pay you rent for the next 2 years. And then when the property gets foreclosed or whatever, the promise was made, the confirmation, the monies had been paid up to that point. Same thing. It's like contractual law. It's in writing, right? Everything has to be in writing for what? It to hold up in a court of law in California. Okay. That's emblements. It says next week. No, this week we're doing water rights. Okay. Water rights. This is Chateau Artisan in Florida. I've talked about this a couple times in a couple of classes. It looks beautiful. I would venture to say, based on the color and the algae, it probably doesn't smell the best. But I mean, it's not a scratch and sniff PowerPoint, so we're doing good. The key to talking about water rights in California, and we're talking about them in California, right, is that no one has title to the water. No one person. The government, they got the water, they got the money, they got the water, they got the things. No one person has title to water, as in a family can't take the water and go, this is mine, 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 all mine. We can't Daffy Duck this, okay? Property owners whose land is next to bodies of water have what is called, quote unquote, air quotes, reasonable right to the use of the water. But the water is not theirs, so there are limits on what you can do with said water. Now, if you are in any county in California, speaking of that, it is my water bill. Hold the phone. We need to check on the water bill. This is reminding me. It doesn't hurt to do it. Please help me check on the water bill information. I'm sending it to Adam. He'll remind me when he gets home. The reason that I'm bringing that up, and we'll talk about our water issue here. We'll talk about it. Maybe that'll be like a break thing. But here in Los Angeles, and anywhere in California. Now, if you're not in California and you're like, these rules don't apply to me, that's okay. If you want to get your license in California, you need to know this information. In California, whether you're in a suburban area, whether you have a well, whether you're wherever you are, if you'll get a bill, and the bill will tell you how many gallons of water were used and how many have been allotted to your house. Not like the Hunger Games, like you're allotted food, but a little bit like that in regards to if you exceed a certain amount of gallons, they're going to charge you for more because they've allocated based on the size of your house, the amount of water that you should use. If you have a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home, they are going to calculate it as 2 adults and 1 child, or 2 adults or 3 adults or something along those lines. They're not going to look at, they're going to look at your standard eco footprint in California and go, okay, based on the number of rooms, this is how many gallons of water should be used. And that would cover the wash and the cleaning of it all. We had this really sweet neighbor recently, well, before this home. And she used to wash the house down every morning to cool the house off for the hot season. And their water bill, her son was like, don't wash the house. And he's like, he doesn't know. And she'd always like tell me he doesn't know. And I'm like, he's getting the bill. That being said, reasonable use. Is her washing the house reasonable use? No. But look, she's this really sweet elderly woman. And I don't speak the same language she does. And I would try to share with her that her son, he's really trying. And she's like, he's okay. And I'm like, okay, anyway, enough about that. So let's talk about riparian rights. Your riparian rights are associated with if there's water nearby you. Riparian rights allow a property owner to use the water from moving water, such as rivers, it should be streams and or creeks. When I think of riparian rights, I think of rip-roaring rapids. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever been on this. Let's put a comma in there. That's going to drive me a bit nuts. Such as rivers. Oh, it needs to be S. Stream, such as a river. Okay, here. Sorry. Editing. Something people don't like me doing, but I'm okay with it. If I don't edit it in the middle of this, I'm just going to take this again. What does it say? Helvecta. We'll save it. I'm fine with that. I don't know what that alert was for, but we'll figure it out later. I know what it's for. It's like font or something. We'll be fine. So riparian rights are like rip-roaring rapids. And there's a reason why it says that. The rip-roaring rapids of it all are associated with the fact that the river is moving. And it's usually moving one direction. So riparian is associated with if you have riparian rights, that means there's a river or a stream or a creek that is next to you that is moving one direction. So that rip-roaring rapids, you're flying down. If you've ever gone whitewater rafting, it's really fun. Although the river, it does kind of take you one direction, but there are those areas that are a little bit crazy. Anyway, rip-roaring rapids, riparian rights. That's how I remember it. Now, when you were talking about littoral rights, this concerns properties next to oceans, next to seas, and next to lakes, rather than a river or a stream. So littoral rights are associated with the use and enjoyment of the shore. And when I think of the word littoral, I think of vacations. I literally need a vacation. Littoral rights, I literally need a vacation. So an easy way to remember this is that riparian rights have to do with the water that is moving in one direction. Rip-roaring rapids is going one direction, right? If you've ever go to Great America or one of these other places that have one of those rides, rip-roaring rapids, you got to get on the line here. You're getting in this vessel, if you will, and it's taking you there and it's going to swing you back over. If you ever go whitewater rafting, they get you in a vessel and they take you that way. It doesn't come back. That takes you downstream, and then they put you in a bunch of Jeeps, and then you kind of like off road. I don't know if you guys have ever been whitewater rafting, but it's fun. Okay. Littoral rights have to do with water that does not have a direction. And you're like, oh, that means it's calm and still. Well, it could be like a lake, but what if it's like an ocean? You've got high tide, you've got low tide. The last image we had is the Dead Sea. You've got no tide. No, nothing's happened here except people floating on salty water. And hopefully nobody has a paper cut, right? Okay. So think riparian. When you're thinking riparian, I want you to think of river, littoral, and lake. Repeat this to yourself and remember it. Think riparian, river, littoral, lake. This should probably, man, Kathy Khan, sister, you are doing lots of editorial. So let's bullet point this. You guys are going to have this. You guys have this in the this PowerPoint in there anyway, but I think it's a little confusing just to put a comma in it. But I want you to repeat this because I do think it's beneficial. Oh my goodness. And the fonts of it all. The fonts are having drama. We're okay with fonts. All right. So I want you to be able to repeat this to you. When you're thinking riparian, I want you to think river. When you're thinking littoral, I want you to think lake, or I literally need a vacation. Littoral, literally. All right. So, and now we are on this kind of movement of water, right? There's also correlative use. This allows property owners to use the underground water or water, from the river for irrigation. So correlative use is usually like agriculture. As you can see in the image, this is a this is a huge space. And I actually, this is right off of, this is down through the center of California, north of the Grapevine. And there is a huge channel of water. There's a number of channels of water, especially in the Central Valley. This water is being channeled through particular areas, and then it's being moved, sometimes underground, sometimes overground, to the area where it's needed, to the different crops and different orchards that it's needed. So correlative use, or notice it doesn't say rights. It's the use of the water. It's the right. It is technically a right to have that water. Allows a property owner to use, to have the use of underground water and water from a river or irrigation. This is an irrigation channel or a reservoir that is helping people water their orchards. So in the states where water is scarce, welcome to California, the doctrine of prior appropriation determines the use of the water. Doctrine of prior appropriation just basically means it's already been appropriated. It's already been split up. You've got a piece of cheese you're sharing with your friend and you give them 50% of it. Awesome. For those of you that can do that kind of thing. I don't like sharing, so we each get one. But anyway, the doctrine of prior appropriation has already appropriated or already split off the water to the different farmers or to the different groups of people that are using it. You could say that a few slides ago when I was talking to you about the water bill and how the city has said, hey, based on the size of your home, this is the amount of gallons of water you should be using. They also are using the doctrine of appropriation because they have already clarified that based on the size of our home, this is the amount of water that should be used. So determines the use of the water. This requires us. And what happens if you go over the water in your house or in your neighborhood? Well, if you go over the water of the house in your neighborhood, you get billed for it. And it's a ransom almost, if you will, right? They're watching if they say something like you have 200 gallons a month and you do 300 gallons, they're going to charge you in excess that additional 100 gallons because that's not what was appropriated or apportioned out for you for that month. So according to this, the doctrine, the use of the water is determined by the state, not the owner who is next to the body of water. And that's very true too. You could be living right next to a lake. There's a lake in Central Valley. It's a man-made lake and they were building these really pretty houses next to it. but you can't, the water is the water is about as functional as the fountains at Disneyland. It's to beautify the space. And I think it's also to grow insects, but that's my own opinion, because I'm like, why are there so many insects up here? But anyway, that being said, it's not the use of that water, it's not the right of the person living next to it that chooses how much water can be used. When we talk about accretion, a number of people are like, I don't even know what that word means. I know. We're going to be talking about accretion and reliction right here. Accretion. It happens when soil is brought by the water and increases the size of the property. This is a neighborhood in California this last rainy season, or when I say rainy season, I mean like a month ago. And this and water from the sky as well as on land moved the dirt in front of these homes, took it down all the way to the edge of the street. And in order to get through the street, they're going to have to move the soil back out. So accretion happens when soil is brought by water and increases the size of the property. This isn't something that happened over the course of 10 years. This is something that happened over the course of a day and a half or 2 days. And it's a terrible situation, and I'm sure it's been taken care of up to this point, but I haven't been keeping my finger on the pulse of the story. So when water moves back, the new land is acquired, and that new land is acquired. This is called reliction. So when water moves back, we could think of like a lake or a ponding basin or something along those lines. Let's say you lived right next to a lake. As the water evaporates out of the lake, the further the water line goes down, when the water moves back, the further the water line goes down, there's more land acquired. And what that means is your part of your property is growing because you're the only one between you and the lake. So when that's what they mean by reliction, and I don't have a picture for that one, although that would be a good idea. I don't know that we need that, but you could say in the most driest of spells, there was that a lot of stuff is found actually when we have reliction. Reliction happened up in Sonora, California, about 2018, I think it was. And there's these areas where they would have reservoirs where they're holding water. One of them was so low that one of the original towns or villages, if you will, that was built back in the 1800s came out of the water. And what I mean by that is the water was so low that you could kind of see the peaks of some of the old buildings that were still there. And it was really kind of just chimneys at that point, because that was really the only thing left that had not washed away or not been rotted. But that's reliction. When the water starts to dissipate and go into the atmosphere, that's what reliction is. So when the water moves back, the new land is acquired. This isn't new land acquired. This is a hot mess. This is an accretion situation right here. Reliction is when the water has moved back. I think we know what erosion is. All of us have been to the beach and we're like, oh, isn't it so beautiful the way the water just washes the sand back in? And then you think about it. Well, erosion is when land or soil is worn away by wind, water, current, or ice. I have yet for us to experience the ice side of things here in California, but if you have sheets of ice falling from the sky, please text me and let me know that, because we won't drive to come and see it. We'll drive the opposite direction. Anyway, erosion. I think we know that word more than the other ones. If natural causes tear away land in a violent way, this is called evulsion. So this is a town near the artichoke capital of the world, in Monterey County, Monterey, California, that in that same rain that we saw in the previous slides, there was a water main, not a water main, but a ponding basin or a dam that broke, and they'd been talking about it for years. So they're like, hey, this isn't going to hold up if a lot of rain comes in, and they just kept putting it off and putting it back off and putting it off. Well, evulsion happened. So what does that mean? Well, if natural causes tear away land in a violent way, it's called evulsion. That dam, that water break, or that holding basin or that ponding basin that was holding water back from flooding this neighborhood broke. and it flooded the neighborhood. And you're like, oh man, I feel really bad for these people. Well, think about it this way. The area where this happened is where in California is agriculture, right? But one of the things that part of California primarily grows and has as implements, if you will, right? They sell implements up there are raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, strawberries, artichokes. That area is known for having raspberries. It's known for having blueberries. If you've ever purchased fruit that's from a company called Driscoll's, that's where Driscoll's is in that area. Driscoll's is located in that area, and they buy from the farmers in that area. So we might see a massive increase or an inflation spike for strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, or we're going to see a bunch of stuff imported from Mexico, which is totally, thank God they're right there, because you know there's a large amount of fruit and stuff that is grown in Mexico and brought up here as well. But these kind of situations are happening in California. So for those of you that are like, it's California, it's not no. The imagery you're seeing here, this is California.